evening, everyone. We'll call the meeting of August 15th to order. Terry, can you confirm that we're in compliance with open meeting laws?
Yes, we are.
And if you would please call roll.
Commissioner Zur?
Here.
Commissioner Bika?
Here.
Commissioner Clements? Commissioner Farrar?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Lyons?
Here.
Commissioner Nordin?
Here. At this time, those who are willing and able, please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As always, we'll start with the adoption of tonight's agenda. I would hear a motion to adopt tonight's agenda.
So.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? Thank you. The agenda is adopted. We'll next move on to our regular recognitions. And as always, I will turn it over to Superintendent Johnson.
Good evening, Chair Nordin, board members, executive team members, and distinguished guests in the audience. We've got two recognitions this evening. First is for Meadowview, their fifth grade leaders. Their focus this past year was on cultivating student leaders. It was primarily on fifth graders. All fifth grade students this past year determined leadership qualities they would consistently demonstrate throughout the school year. In addition, they met frequently with staff to talk about the importance of serving as positive role models to their younger peers. These conversations also challenged the students to think about the legacy they would be leaving behind at Meadowview and how their behaviors and actions would impact their legacy. As a result of the conversations, all fifth grade students had their school picture framed and displayed in our hallways with a caption stating the leadership quality they would strive to consistently demonstrate. A special thank you to the Eau Claire Public Schools Foundation for the funding for the project. All their fifth graders served in a leadership role in one or more of the following capacities. First would be safety patrol. The second would be library assistant. Third was kindergarten classroom greeters. And last, creating daily video news and announcements. Meadowview remains a great school with a fantastic climate and culture, due in large part to the outstanding student leaders in our school. Congratulations to Meadowview, fifth grade. And secondly, Robbins, the kindness kickoff. Robbins is thrilled to begin the year again with its kindness kickoff, a chance for students and staff to emphasize the importance of kindness in our school community and beyond. Kickoff happens the second week of the school year with various activities in classrooms, culminating in an assembly and a walk run for students around the grounds. The students can gather pledges for their efforts, and we celebrate success as a school for their hard work and determination. The picture above is from last year's event with the theme Color Me Kind. We look forward to another chance for students from all grades to get to know one another. Keep soaring, Eagles, and stay kind. That does it for our recognitions this evening.
Thank you. We'll now move on to our public forum. The board provides a 30-minute period in which community members may address the board to express viewpoints or concerns. Each community member is allowed up to 4 minutes to address the board. The school board does not hear personal complaints of school personnel nor any person connected with the school system in a public forum. When you come forward, please state your name and address for the record. Tonight, we have Mark Goings.
Hello, my name is Mark Goings. I live in Augusta, Wisconsin. I'm the president of ECAE. Well, tonight's the big night. You're planning to identify the referendum question, and I applaud the pre-planning that the board has undertaken. There's no doubt we have needs. As we've been an underfunded district for over 20 years, having been held hostage by an unfair funding formula, which puts our students at a disadvantage. It's incorrigible that Eau Claire students receive less funding per capita when compared to their peers across the state, consistently putting our funding in the bottom third. This has caused a backlog of needs. It is not an equitable state funding system, and until the state school funding formulas change, we will likely need to go to referendum every few years. The good news, however, is that our community survey shows resounding support for an operational referendum. The support for capital projects was a bit more tepid, but it is still there. And excuse me, while the community has expressed tremendous support for an operational referendum, I urge you to put forth a hybrid question, as we also have significant capital needs. Capital needs are clear and easy to identify, and whereas operational needs can be a bit more difficult to articulate. Bricks and mortar are great, but ultimately schools are a people business. Local, state, and national media are constantly talking about the teacher shortage, staff shortages, et cetera. Investments in our operational needs are crucial. Without them, how will we continue to meet the academic, social, and emotional needs of our students? How do we attract and retain high-quality staff in an increasingly competitive employment environment? Clarity of concept helps. Here's an example of investing in the operational needs of our students. For example, we know that since COVID, students have increasing mental health needs and that co-curricular activities increase their engagement, self-confidence, and connection to peers and adults. Our increment system is how we compensate the leaders of our arts, music, athletics, club programs, etc. However, due to lack of funding, our increments have been up for review for more than a decade. The rate established in 2012, as described in the Increment Committee report from 2013-14, uses the same base rate of pay as we do today. Folks, that's embarrassing. Our students deserve better than that. Examples like that are likely why our community has shown such support for an operational referendum. How long will the board allow such a freeze? How are our students already being affected? This is difficult work. At times it feels like we're moving money from one spot to another in some sort of strange shell game. We have a backlog of both operational and capital needs, which we must address as we also try to move toward a system of excellence. I wish you the best on your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public forum for the evening. So we will move on to our regular reports. And as always, we will start with the Referendum Committee. Commissioner Lyons.
The Referendum Committee has met several times since our last meeting. Tonight's meeting will be really a culmination of the work of that committee, where we did craft some of the questions that the board will be looking at tonight. So I will defer to that presentation. It will be a great summary of the work that we've done during that time.
Thank you. Next, our Legislative Liaison, Dr. Johnson.
Wisconsin DPI releases sudden cardiac arrest resources for district use in connection with new mandate. School districts and other persons who operate certain youth athletic activities are now required to distribute information about the nature and risk of sudden cardiac arrest to coaches, participants, and parents. The information about sudden cardiac arrest is to be added to the communication that schools are already distributing about concussions and head injuries. The mandates are found in section 118293 and 118293.5 of the state statutes. The U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights and Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services have released new guidance to help public elementary and secondary schools fulfill their responsibilities to meet the needs of students with disabilities and avoid discriminatory use of student discipline. Included among the resources available are supporting students with disabilities and avoiding the discriminatory use of student discipline under Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, letter and accompanying fact sheet. And then addressing the needs of children with disabilities, an IDEA's discipline provisions letter and questions and answers, and positive proactive approaches to supporting the needs of children with disabilities, a guide for all stakeholders. The Wisconsin Office of Children's Mental Health recently released a new fact sheet strengthening student mental health, outlining what students, parents, schools, and policymakers can do to foster positive mental health in students. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. At this time, we'll move on to our consent agendas. For each of our consent agendas, the board acts with one vote without discussion. If a board member wants to discuss any items, it will be pulled out of the consent item agenda and voted on separately. First up is our superintendent's consent agenda. Tonight's superintendent's consent agenda includes human resources employment report, gifts in the amount of $200,052.04 for the period of June 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2022. Payment of all bills in the amount of $16,520,073.85 and net payroll in the amount of $4,531,687.71 for the period of June 1st, 2022 through June 30th, 2022, and 5-year capital project bids. We would hear a motion to approve the superintendent's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Terry, if you would conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin.
Yes. We'll now move to the board's consent agenda. The board's consent agenda includes minutes of closed session, July 18th, 2022, minutes of board meeting, July 18th, 2022, minutes of board meeting, August 1st, 2022, change to board meeting date, R1 mega results affirm, and OE1 global operational expectation affirm. Your motion to approve the board's consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? Consent agenda is approved. We'll now move on to matters reserved for board action. We have two main parts for tonight. The first is the approval of the 2022-2023 employee handbook modifications. To start us off, I will turn it over to Kay Marks.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks, Terry. So the 2022-23 proposed employee handbook modifications have been shared with all board members prior to tonight. The Employee Relations Committee did not meet during the 2021-22 school year. When the committee would have met in the spring to review the changes, that was the time when the district was under the process of hiring a new Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Knowing that that critical position would be joining the district, we asked at that point in time that the employee handbook be placed for the board to postpone that until this point in time so that we could include the new director in the work that the ERC does in terms of employee handbook modifications. At that point in time, we had Mr. Dan Yang joined the district on July 5th as the new director of EDI. During his first week in the position, Director Yang met with members of the human resources team to discuss the employee handbook, the work and the role of the ERC in that process, and what revisions to the employee handbook were needed. The group determined what could reasonably be accomplished in the time that was allotted before tonight's presentation to the board. And additionally, we created an in-depth plan, which includes an extensive review of the employee handbook through the lens of EDI, which will occur throughout the 2022-23 school year. ERC met again on July 19th, joined by Director Yang. And under his guidance, the committee reviewed and approved what could be accomplished in the short amount of time to move toward a more equitable employee handbook, including a foreword to state who we are as a school district community and gender inclusive language changes. ERC also discussed a few handbook changes that were more in-depth and determined that since additional discussion was needed, those items would be moved forward to the work of the committee in the upcoming school year. ERC met on July 25th for another time to discuss the items needing further review. At that point in time, joining the ERC was Director Yang, as well as Executive Director Mandy Van Vliet and Director of Academic Services Heather Grant. After discussion and questions, ERC approved a few additional handbook modifications at that point in time and then added to their list some more items for upcoming work to be done in the following school year. During this next year, I, along with Director Yang, will meet with the ERC on a regular basis. ERC will do a thorough review of the employee handbook through an equity lens under the direction and guidance of Director Yang. ERC has also determined that they'd like to work toward a more employee support language in the handbook to come forward to you next time. And with the help of Director Yang, ERC plans to grow the committee to include a larger variety of voices that can help guide and support that work. In tonight's handbook modifications that are before you, there's actually 76 handbook modifications that you've all seen in preparation for tonight. Of those 76 changes, 62 of them are purely for the purposes of gender inclusive language. So there's 14 of them that are for other reasons, even though those other reasons may also include gender inclusive language with the additional purpose. So as we go through those tonight, I'm not sure, President Nordin, if you want to go section by section.
I will leave it up to some of my colleagues. I'm comfortable. I mean, we've had this now for a good deal of time to review. I don't necessarily think I personally would need, a step by step. It's been there and we can see it. But if others would like to go through it, have Kay go through it bit by bit, we can do that. Otherwise, I think we could probably just skip right ahead to discussion and approval.
Agreed.
Yes.
So with that, then we'll just skip right ahead to any discussion or comments or questions for you as we go forward. Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, did you, on page 9, 503 procedures, are those procedures, I guess the question that I have for page 9, handbook 503, the procedures for grievances. In the first step, what's the process if the grievance is against the immediate supervisor? So are you still supposed to go to the person that the grievance is against? Or I guess or is there an additional step, or does someone have an alternative, or am I reading that incorrectly? So within that, it says that within 10 days, a person is supposed to go to their immediate supervisor. However, if the person is the immediate supervisor for the grievance, is there an alternative approach or can you automatically go to B, or do you go to the supervisor of that individual? I'm just curious.
I'm hesitating because I'm questioning whether or not what we see here is the full section of the grievance language. Because sometimes we only put in the section that's being modified and not the entire chunk of the language from that particular section. And so, Raquel, I don't have a separate computer to pull it up to say, okay, in that section.
Not that are you okay if Kay just gets back to you with that answer?
Yeah.
Since it's not on the change, it's more of an information. Is that okay?
Yeah, I guess for me though, is if there's not an alternative, I guess this is actually like a huge piece, I think, of actually knowing that there's avenues for grievances, and if it would influence my vote, but I'll try to find it throughout the discussion if I can. I'll just pull up, and then the second.
We're not voting on the actual procedure here. We're voting only on the changes.
Yeah, so but for me though, I would not, even what's highlighted here, I would not be able to kind of move forward. But that's the other clarification. If you could go to page 17, section B for me, have in the discussions that will take place with Mr. Yang and his group, section B, is there going to be is there an internal definition of what you mean by the mentor? Like how are mentors selected, and who like mentorship? When we talk about mentorship, what do we mentorship in that particular that content area, or mentorship just as it relates to just being an educator in the district? And does the teacher themselves have some say in terms of that selection process? Do you
also have a question about the mentor? Be back on that, if it's okay.
I mean, Dr. Johnson, the floor is yours right now. Is it all right for?
Oh, yeah, no, well, yeah, so.
And I want to apologize that we have had this now for a while and I just noticed it today. So I'm not sure, I was having a hard time remembering who else was at this table. This is pre-COVID when the board, we received some great outcome data on the mentor program. And I wanted to ask why the 3-year, so I might have a bit of a more background on who these mentors are and why they're assigned and the outcomes that we were getting on those mentors. So my separate question is, why were we eliminating or making that change of the up to 3 years and then only maybe assigned a mentor when what I remembered is the multiple year mentorship was really paying off in the data.
Sure. So I'll respond to parts of this, but then just so that Mandy knows that I'll turn some things over to her as the mentor program is in the teaching and learning department. So part of the question for you, Dr. Johnson, is that the mentor program is it's a the mentors are trained through the T&L department, and mentors have to be trained through the program that's run through T&L to be able to be on the mentor list, so to speak. And that is, and Mandy can speak more to that piece, but that's how you become a mentor, is to go through the training program through T&L. And then Lori, in terms of that change, and again, Mandy can elaborate on this, but part of that has to do with the fact that our original language that was in this section literally rolled over from collective bargaining agreement language. And at that point in time, many years ago, the majority of staff that we were hiring were right out of school, brand new to the profession. Now, many of the staff that we hire are not necessarily right out of school. And so the language was limiting to us in that we might have somebody who's been in the profession for 15 years, and the language is saying that they are assigned a mentor for 3 years. And in many cases, their mentor that they're assigned to may have less experience in the profession than what they do as a new teacher to our district. And so by flipping it and providing us the option in there, it provided more flexibility to the district in that partnership. Mandy?
So I think the first question, Commissioner Markwell, is who decides this and how does a mentor become a mentor? It's really a building decision or principal's decision based on knowing who their staff are and who would be a good matchup with the new staff that they have coming in. Certainly, there's been times where a mentor has changed over the course or throughout the school year because perhaps maybe it wasn't a good matchup. The principal makes that decision on who that is and what those matches are. And to reiterate what Kay had shared, Commissioner Bika, as we in teaching and learning continue to look at our professional learning model, one of our pieces is mentorship, and also the professional development that is needed for coaching and training and professional development. So as a teaching and learning department, as we're breaking up those different supports that we provide all teachers, not only new teachers, we are also looking at our mentor program and knowing how it can look different than what our coaching model is, and how we support any teacher, but specifically new teachers, through instructional coaches and our literacy SEL coaches. So the changes also give us the flexibility that we need based on the needs of the staff member. So it gives us the ability to differentiate based on our teachers' needs and what they might need. So for some, 1-year mentorship is what that staff member needs. For others, it might be 2. And certainly if needed, we could consider 3 based on what that staff member needs. So changing the language here gives us the flexibility to do that. And I tried to write down all those questions that I could. Did I miss? Or does that give the clarity that you need? Okay.
Dr. Johnson, I'll go back to you if you've got other comments or questions.
Those were good.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Dr. Bekas.
More just a word of thanks that I really appreciated the descriptions, explanations at the front of each section. I think it really helped guide us through the document, and I know that takes time. So thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
So if there are no other comments or questions, I would hear a motion to approve the handbook changes as presented.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
You any discussion on the motion to approve the handbook changes as presented? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of approval of the handbook modifications, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Aye.
The motion passes. The handbook is approved. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The remainder of our evening outside of our regular debrief will be focused on hopefully getting to a point of approving a referendum question for November. We have several items here on the agenda for it. It starts with our referendum presentation, and so I will turn that over to Abby Johnson.
You want that?
Right. So tonight we have a few topics that we wanted to cover. We had some information that was requested after the work session on August 1st. We wanted to talk about the referendum committee recommendation, then the referendum question, and then allow some time for the full board to discuss, where we landed with the referendum committee, as well as the actual referendum questions that the board would be asked to adopt if they want to do that tonight. So first of all, our follow-up from the August 1st work session. I think commissioners there brought up and talked about the mill rates by district throughout the state of Wisconsin. And so we did include the map that was shared with us as well. And as you can see, this tiny little yellow spot right here, I believe, is us. And we're kind of surrounded by green, and the yellow is really between $3.02 per $1,000 of equalized value up to $8. And we know that last year our tax rate was just over $7 and had been going down. We did have the information historically of what the ECSD mill rate has looked like. And we've been gathering that data since 1988. And so you can see in 1988, when we first started kind of tracking and looking at that internally as a district, that we were between $16 and $17 per $1,000 of equalized value. You can kind of see there was a spike, and then it's been down and down and down. And then even since our referendum in 2016-17, we went up a little bit, but we've consistently been going down. The things you need to remember that go into that are the equalized value, our 3-year membership enrollment, any levies that we're making for debt and how that changes. So it's not just as simple to say, hey, we just need to levy more. There's a lot of things that go into that formula, but this is something that we thought was important to follow up since the question was asked. And the referendum committee did see this information previously at our meetings. So the referendum committee has met twice since the August 1st work session, and our takeaway from the August 1st work session was to determine the number of questions. Was there going to be one question for 70 million? Was there going to be a question for 90 million? Or was there going to be 2 questions that were around 90 million in projects? And then come up with a type of question. Is it going to be operational? Is it going to be operational and capital, or just capital? So as we reflected and did some work, one of the things that we talked about in our committee meetings was that $71 million in bonds doesn't mean 71 million for the total operation or the total referendum costs. In the projections that we were looking at on August 1st, 71 million in bond projects is actually 204.6 million because you have the operational component and you have to include that in the total cost of the referendum. The 71 million that we were talking about was projects and things that we were going to do for our buildings. In there, there's some interest costs as well. And then we had some operational dollars that would be provided in that scenario that we talked about. When we looked at the $92 million projects, again, 92 was not the total cost. Our committee understood that, but we're not sure that that was clear to board members as well. So on a $92 million bond project, the total referendum cost is $264 million. Again, you have a construction piece for your bonds, you have interest cost, and then you have money available for operations for the next 20 or 23 years, depending upon the length of the question. So then the referendum committee really worked on the capital question, determining both what would the words look like. You know, administration was tasked with that piece. And so, the administration met on Tuesday morning after that August 1st work session. Our committee met on Wednesday and went through a lot of those information. And on that Wednesday, we decided as a committee it was best to move forward with a capital referendum only. There was a lot of conversation and why, but one of the biggest reasons why we decided that a capital recommendation would be best for the district is the district has received $12 million in excess of 12 million for ESSER funding. That funding is available for the district to use for operations for the next 2 fiscal years, and it actually goes into September of the 3rd fiscal year. And so we know that we're going to put that emphasis on focusing on learning loss. We're looking at our social and emotional learning and supports, and we're looking at our school environment safety. As an administrative team, as well as the referendum committee, we talked a lot about being simple in our question. And we want our community to understand our question and we want it simple. We're working on all of these pieces for operational components right now. We couldn't make it simple for everybody to understand. We also had a very challenge of looking at how do we articulate our needs today for the next 20 plus years. And so what we know we need today for operations, is that really going to be the same in 20 years? And when our community comes to us and says, hey, how are you using those referendum dollars from 2022? Are they going to have the same answer? Because many of us will not be sitting around the table in 20 years. And so that was something that we wanted to make sure that was clear and we were able to talk about and easy to understand for our community. And knowing that we have these ESSER dollars, we felt that we need to, again, tell our story. We need to let our community know we're going to focus on capital today, but we're going to come back for operational in 2 to 5 years, because we feel that in 2 to 5 years, we can articulate what those operational needs and those costs exactly are. So when we kind of talked about the big picture and going down, what does our funding strategy look like? And we have been talking about this at the referendum committee, and I know it came up on August 1st as well, is what does this look like going forward from a strategy as far as referendum goes? And so this is a very, very rough estimate, but these are the things that we've been talking about and considering. So in the next 2 to 5 years, we know that we're going to have an operational need. There's a lot of things that go into that operational need that really make it hard for us to articulate today. How much is our mill rate impacted by this? How much state funding? We know there's a new biennium budget coming. What does that look like? What about federal funding? Is federal funding going to stay the same? We know we have a big amount of federal funding due to ESSER today, but when that's gone, what are the other sources of federal funding? How does that look at our state rank per pupil spending? We heard about that earlier today, right? And then how does that fit into OE number 10, which is specifically related to budget and financial planning? So we're very confident at this point with all of those unknowns that in 2 to 5 years, we are going to need to ask our community for an operational referendum. We might have a capital component at that time as well. We just don't know yet. In 5 to 10 years, there's likely going to be another need to go to referendum. 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 years and beyond. We've been studying other districts across the state. We know that La Crosse specifically goes to their community every 3 to 5 years for a non-recurring operational, and it's very consistent and very strategic. The question doesn't change much. It's basically renewing that question. And so how does that fall into our conversations and the things that we've been working on? We're paying attention to that. Even right now, there's a lot of districts struggling with this decision as well. Superintendent Johnson and I, we're seeing the news daily, and there's a lot of school districts that are saying, hey, we have a lot of capital needs and we know we have operational needs, so community, get ready. We're going capital now, but we're going to come back for operational. And so I think that that also gives us an opportunity to tell our story and be able to articulate those needs simply. Our referendum committee, after the August 1st work session, we talked about looking at capital and what could the projects look like. The 72, the 92, and the 110 you've seen, we talked about those at the August 1st meeting, but 82 was a question in our committee meeting. What if we can touch more schools? Abby, can you take this 9.3 million that's in the 110, because we know it touches more buildings. What does that look like in 82 million? So we brought that forward in our committee meeting last week. We looked at what's the cost to our taxpayer in our community? How does that compare to what the survey told us? Well, I was very surprised when I saw these numbers and the affordability and how that fit into what our survey results told us. And so I worked with Baird and I said, you know, what if we were to do a little bit more? What if we were to go 99 million? We could touch some more buildings. We could look at that. And how would that compare? So I got this great information from Baird that told us 30 cents on a $72 million bond issue is $30 on 100,000. If we went 82, it's 34, 38, 40, 44. So that 99 million would cost approximately 40 cents per $1,000 of equalized value for our community. That 40 cents was the recommended amount in our survey. And so we spent a lot of time talking about that at the referendum committee. And we looked at 3 different options as far as the referendum committee. Again, taking into consideration what we heard on the August 1st work session. And so we presented last week 3 options. Again, Putnam Heights doesn't change in any of our options, very similar to what we explored on August 1st. Memorial and North, in the $99 million option, the difference is the grandstand. If you'll remember, in the 110 million option, there was some additions for extra and co-curriculars, and there was a turf field and a grandstand included in there. And so again, we were trying to hit that 99 million number. And so in order to do that, we needed to take the grandstand out of both North and Memorial, but it does give the opportunity to have turf. It does have the opportunity to upgrade the auditorium at Memorial High School, and then the addition at North High School for, you know, that weight room and that athletic entrance that we had been talking about. South gets that major upgrade that we've been talking about for so long. You know, when you don't touch a building for 40 years, you kind of get into a spot where you really need to touch it. And so that encompasses all of the changes that are desired at South. This number, this other number was originally 9.3 million. And as I worked with Jeff, and he's here tonight in case we have questions, we kind of identified some things that maybe we can use ESSER money for, because we know there's a portion that can be used for HVAC and things like that. And then there was a few things that were like, you know what, we can probably cover this out of our budget. And so this $8.4 million number still touches many schools, but it gives it a a more broad thing, and we want to issue debt for these projects. We had a few projects that we feel we easily could do with ESSER funds or in the capital budget. So that's why that number is a little bit different. But this is really where our referendum committee, we had a lot of discussion last week, and that's why it's circled. This is the option that's being brought forward for you tonight to vote on and adopt a resolution on. It's that 98.6 million. And so just a reminder of the other schools that are included. There's some high priority needs at North Star that would be accomplished in this proposal. Sam Davy has some high and medium priority, Locust Lane, Mans, Meadowview, Northwoods, and Sherman. Again, hitting those high and medium priorities. If you'll remember back to the facility study, it was looking at what do we need to do in the next 5 years? And then looking at how much money does that cost and where are the priorities? And so we wanted you to be aware of here's the buildings that we're talking about, and it's taking care of some of those things that are needed and necessary in the next 2 to 5 years, which would put us in a better spot when we need to think about what does that next referendum look like as well. Any questions so far on this information? Okay, now we get to look at the questions. So there are 2 options for the questions. And we've talked a lot about this at our referendum committee meeting. And really the part all the way up to this colon is statute. We can't change that amount. I'm sorry, we can't change the words except for the amount. And the amount isn't easy to change. We would have to do some additional work if there's conversation about that being different. But what we do have flexibility in is the words that are after this colon. So one of the versions that we talked about was this wording: construction of additions and renovations at Memorial and North High School, South Middle, and Putnam Heights Elementary Schools. Then you get into capital maintenance, building infrastructure, and site and athletic facility improvements at district schools, and acquisition of furnitures, fixtures, and equipment. So we did have a lot of conversation about, do we need the words furnishings, fixtures, and equipment? That seems really narrow, but part of the project cost is to be able to furnish those classrooms that we're adding, be able to get some of the fixtures. And so according to the attorney, we need to include those words there. This question in particular gives us a little bit more flexibility because it says district schools. And so if a project comes in under budget or some things change, by using the word district schools, then we might be able to encompass a project at a different school if the funds are available. If we look at the question B, again, up to the colon is exactly the same. And where you're going to see the difference here is we're listing out those schools in that other category. And so you can see Memorial and North High, South Middle, and Putnam Heights Elementary Schools, capital maintenance, building infrastructure, and site and athletic facility improvements at Locust Lane, Mans, Meadowview, Northwoods, Putnam Heights, Sam Davy, and Sherman Elementary, North Star and South Middle, and Memorial and North High School. So those are the two differences. And we had a lot of discussion about the length of the question. What should the words be? Do we articulate every school? Is it better to have district schools? And so that's why you see two questions before you tonight, because we didn't know what the full board would like. And so we wanted to provide the information and what we talked about. So that was the end of, the presentation. We wanted to allow some time for discussion and questions on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you to the referendum committee as well for all of the work and the extra time that you've been putting in. At this time, we'll open it for discussion. Actually, I want to start. Abby, what's the process that we need to go through tonight, assuming that what do we need to do here? I mean, I know we have these two items, but if you could walk us through and walk listening through so we know what we're looking for as we discuss tonight.
But so there's two things that the board actually needs to do, and that's on my next slide. So once you've determined that, yep, this is the question that we like, you would actually vote to adopt the resolution that gives the authority to issue the general obligation bonds in the amount of 98.6. So that's a separate resolution. That would have to be voted on and approved. And then there's a second resolution that actually talks about putting the question on the ballot, and that approves the version of the question that you want. And so basically, once that's done, I have some paperwork that I need you, President Nordine, and Dr. Johnson to sign as well. And then I need to send that into the attorneys, and that kind of gets the process rolling from that end.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So comments and questions, discussion.
I can,
Commissioner Lyons.
sorry, thank you, Chairman. I can give kind of an overview with help from my fellow referendum committee members on how we moved from the last board meeting where we were talking operational to something that's really specifically capital. And you put in your presentation the ESSER funds. So what does the ESSER funds really have to do with the referendum? Well, when we were crafting the question and we were looking at that operational component that was in the original question, trying to describe what we would do with operational dollars, that correctly the survey did point out that mental health and basic skills were elevated in the public's opinion on things that ought to be funded. But being able to very clearly tell the public what we were going to spend these dollars on over a longer term, when we had dollars that were granted by the federal government in ESSER, the idea of moving forward with a capital campaign that specifically was school buildings and facilities for Memorial North, South Middle, and Putnam Heights seemed much clearer to be able to describe and have the public understand exactly where these dollars were going. There was a challenge when we started to do that on the operational side. In longer term, what would these operational dollars go to, mental health wise, basic skills wise? And we did talk about, and Abby did address it, future referendums that we could come back and really, we shouldn't be in the business of every 5 years having a very large referendum. I think that we need to be incrementally addressing things. And, I absolutely agree. Well, I'll stop there. And
Dr. Bika?
Yeah, I might, when Abby talks about a simple or a clear articulation of need. And so Commissioner Lyons, I'll agree with what you were saying, but maybe put it just a bit of a different interpretation to it. When you say simple articulation, I think of three things. And one thing I'll mention first now, and that is, and I want to connect it back to what was said by Mr. Goings during public comment. About the idea we have a backlog of both capital and operational needs as we move toward a system of excellence. And I now feel very confident that data collection and data analysis for the ESSER related supports is the right strategy right now for the next couple of years. And I think that's what's going to put us in the best position to know in that next referendum, in those 2 to 3 years from now, exactly what mental health supports and academic supports we're going to need. So that's what helped me kind of move over on that one point.
Commissioner Zur.
So I have a lot to say, as you guys probably can imagine. So if you just go back to that mill rate slide, slide 4. Superintendent Johnson, gave me a call after the referendum committee meeting this week, or last week, to discuss a little bit about the move from operational and capital to capital only. And I think I said in the work session that it wasn't big enough for me. And I think this is why I feel that way, is because this makes me sick to my stomach. Like, it makes me sick to my stomach that we are $3 below where we were 5 years ago and how we, that is a precipitous drop. That just can't stomach that. And to climb our community back to even what is already low funding, it is going to be really hard to do. It's going to be a really hard sell to just raise taxes until we get to what was even, a moderate tax levy at $10. And that's where I want us to be. So no matter how you put a question together, it just doesn't sit right for me, because it's not enough. You know what I mean? The capital's not enough. Without operations, it's not enough. It's not enough in 2 years. It's not enough next year. It won't be enough in 10 years, the way we're sitting right now. So I think for the place that I'm stuck at is where the lack of vision and strategic planning seem to have sort of coalesced here for me. I just want to put this out there, is that if we know where we're aiming for with our student results, if we know what we want, what do we want, 85, we want kids achieving at a certain level, we have these things that we're aiming for. We should be able to, as a district, clearly articulate the things that get us there. Those should be check boxes in an Excel spreadsheet someplace, the things that we need to fund to get us there. You know what I mean? And whether that's capital or operational, we should have that list ongoing. And if it's 8, 10, $20 million that we need to do that, that should be a working list. And so what I think we need as a school district is we need a referendum planning document. And I think Dr. Beek, I think you were the one who originally brought this up ages ago. We need that in policy. That needs to be part of OE10, period. It needs to be written into OE10, and that is something that we monitor. It is something that we expect the administration to bring us, and it needs to be tied to student results, both operational and capital. And we need to see that every year when we monitor OE10, so that we can piece together a referendum clearly based on need when it is time to do that. So, you know, from where I sit, I'm not going to vote against money because we need all the money. We need so much money. So, you know, however we get to student results, I would agree that I want to see these systems from ESSER monitored. I think that's really important. And I think that was very clearly and well articulated. And I agree with that. I don't want us to lean into something we don't actually have a lot of data on yet. So, you know, I'm fine with this, but I would like us to be thoughtful, and I would like us to set future boards and superintendents up for success. And I would like us to set our community and our kids up for success and stop whatever that curve is and get us back to a level of funding that meets all of our needs, operational and capital, even though, I mean, I would really like whatever was happening in like the early 90s there would be great. But, you know, at least someplace that's manageable.
Well said, Commissioner Zerd. Terry, if you could add that piece, I know that it's been mentioned to me too, that we need to add that in, but if you could put it on that list, just so we don't forget it for OE10 revision. Go ahead, Dr.
So that, I guess, brings to mind for me the second thing, that when Ms. Johnson talks about clear and simple, the issue for me is that means this is not our only referendum, and that we are launching into something that is a bit of a leap of faith because we haven't seen it unfold fully, right? But what is a 30-year plan for referendums? So we'll have both capital and operational, where we bring our district in line with the rest of the state. I mean, that's also a meaning of simple.
Commissioner Clements.
As I've contemplated, and I got to attend parts of the referendum working group and first parts of the meetings, is the conflict between using, as Commissioner Bika mentioned, the ESSER program in terms of evaluating the use of those funds. How can we put resources where our own data would indicate are most needed? But going back to this, this is not going to improve in the next 2 years, so that you can assume that unless something kind of inflection happens with the economy, the line will continue in the same direction at a similar rate. What our CPI numbers are going to look like, just, whatever it is, we can't afford it, frankly. And we just recently approved I would guess a backsliding on insurance in terms of what our staff are receiving, much less retirees. But I'm thinking there's already a substantial need there right now, that there's already huge holes that we're just going to assume that we can deal with for the next 2 years. And I don't think we can, frankly, because those holes are going to get wider every year. So that just where my hangup is, you know, is ideally looking at a 20 or 30-year referendum plan, assuming state funding mechanisms aren't changing, based upon piloting a ship with significant holes right now that we're bailing water from. I think those two things are in direct conflict. And I think that's not to say we couldn't use what we're learning from ESSER now to inform what's going to happen in the future, but we absolutely should. But I think that we have significant holes now that even if we had an extra $2.5 million a year, that's a Band-Aid on, you know, that's not even the insurance question. You know, the hole is bigger than that just for insurance, not much less what CPI is going to be. So, yeah, I don't know that we can do well without having some sort of operational component.
For Dr. Johnson.
I'll follow Josh. Well, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Beacon.
Dr. Beacon.
So what Commissioner Clements, what you just said reminds me of the third and last, I promise, thing that when Ms. Johnson says simple, and I want to again connect it back to the public comment. So you said just a while ago, you said, we are working on all of the operational components. And I really do believe that. And I think some of the things you get to see in public and some of the things you don't. And CPI would be an example, of course, by state statute. We talk about that in closed session. But I feel more confident than ever before, when I hear you all as board colleagues, and when I hear members of the executive team, as we've worked through CPI, for example, in the last couple of years, so you know, granted the full CPI. I mean, I know that we're committed to be highly competitive, aggressive in recruitment and retention. I know we are. And we talk about, you know, we share data during those closed sessions. It's not a big surprise, right? We share data about, you know, there's a crisis in teacher shortage and school staff shortage. That's a national crisis. That's not an Eau Claire problem alone. It's everywhere. And we talk about how it's not just the number of people who are graduating from teacher education programs. It's also educators who are leaving for, you know, completely new professions. We know all that and we actively talk about it. So I feel it, you know, this board is as committed to that as ever. And I feel confident about that. So do we have big challenges? I mean, yes. Do we have strategies to meet those challenges? I think yes.
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, you know, I've been going back and forth, I think, with a lot of comments. And I think, you know, Commissioner Clements, Commissioner Zuri, your concerns are well taken. You know, I think the public comments from Mr. Goings, but when I am uncomfortable with the idea of general operations, because the argument that I would have in terms of that specificity in terms of the operation, Commissioner Clements, what you actually just indicated in terms of actually going towards accounting for insurance and or for salaries, there are individuals working every day that are actually on low minimum wage. They're actually not seeing increases in salary, but we're asking some of those same individuals to say, let us use this money to potentially do this, versus actually what the feedback from some of the surveys said, you know, if it's specific to staffing to decrease class sizes, staffing to address mental health, staffing to address learning loss, that's addition of staff, not insurance, and all of that's real. And, you know, I think in that latest Wisconsin Policy Forum, you know, 94.3% of the districts in Wisconsin rely on state and local. And now that 93%, now it's up to 78 to 79% of it actually from local. And since 2000, over 90% of the fundings actually come from referenda. And it has to be strategic. My suggestion in terms of a strategy is we will. every 3 years. I'm not sure what this tells me is actually, I look at this, what's on display about the tax rate history. We could look at this multiple ways. Maybe the community in Eau Claire doesn't actually really support education, or they support education to a point of actually doing it fiscally and just seeing how we fare. I don't know. Or, maybe we in the community, these numbers, when we compare it to others, are we better than as a community, are we better than other districts? That's the challenge that, we would have to ask in terms of our funding. But when we think about that operational piece of just that additional money sitting there, we also know what the public sentiment is actually, there is some public sentiment that we already have money that overabundance that we are not using appropriately. Somewhere that's out there, so the specificity of articulating what we would do with our operational matters. And I'm not sure you get a lot of rah about actually addressing, raises and insurance and all that versus more staffing. Do I support more staffing? I definitely do. But where is that staffing going? I need to know that as a taxpayer. Do I support services for students? Most definitely. Where are they most needed? That's where they should go. That's what I would support. And I'm not sure, as been articulated, if we don't have a clear direction on where that's going, it's a little bit more difficult for me to get an operation. 2 years from now, I'm all on the operation and the capital train as well, and trying to finish off where the needs where we left off, because there's still some things that are going to have to happen. And so as we were talking about this referendum committee, and I think it was given the amount of feedback that was given on this committee, I think moving forward, something else that will have to change in the committee, there has to be one optimistic, really happy person on referendum committee. Obviously, we figured out the three of us are probably not the most optimistic of the group. And so there needs to be, we got to find somebody who's really the most optimistic of the group instead of, straightforward. So that's another requirement. But yeah, that's how I felt about the operational piece. Yeah. So.
Dr. Farrar.
Yeah, so I guess I'm last to talk. I'm grateful to all the comments so far. Commissioner Zur and Clements, Dr. Bika, Dr. Johnson. This is really difficult. The need we have is so tremendous. The need we have for funding for this district it's tremendous, and we're facing so many issues in our political environment, in our economic environment, that make it really hard to ask the public for money. We need the money. We need it so much. We're also facing a really short time frame in order to communicate our story for this referendum to the public in our community. And I am concerned about this slide. It matters a lot to me too, Commissioner Sir. It's not acceptable. We have so far to go in order to explain what that means. We have so far to go in explaining why our district is so radically underfunded, because it is. It's radically underfunded. And I don't believe the public understands that. I don't think they do. I'm worried that not enough members of our community understand that. I'm worried that not enough members of our community understand why both the school district and the city need to go to referendum right now because of state funding formulas that make no sense, that specifically disadvantage our town, in a way that is unfair and that harms our students. We're just a few people on the board. And, you know, I'm really grateful for the work of Ms. Johnson and other members of the executive team who are trying to give us the information that we need in order to make something happen that can improve our situation. We need to improve the situation of the district. But I'm worried about the time frame that we have. And that is what I think inclines me to accept a capital only at this time, knowing that we have ESSER funding that will get us through a little more time. But then that means we really need to make sure that that ESSER funding goes to operations. It's got to go to operations. If we are not going to ask for an operations referendum, we have to spend all of our ESSER money, as much as it is legal to spend on operations. It's all got to go there. That's all I have to say at this moment.
Commissioner Lyons.
I started out doing kind of a summary on some of the things that the referendum committee was considering. So this is really where I personally fell. And I would call it more pragmatic than kind of non-optimistic. So from a pragmatic view, and Director Johnson, when we had the architectural study that was done for our facilities, it came in just a little bit north of, or a little bit south of 130 million.
Correct.
Okay. And about 3/4 of that really was work that in our facilities needed to be done either immediately or in the next 5 years. Okay. So 120 some odd million. And then the second data point that I was really looking at was that community survey. What was the community willing to bear for a district referendum? That came in at about 40 cents per thousand. What is in front of us pragmatically addresses long overdue facility needs within that target of what the community will support. And that's where I really felt comfortable with this, because I want a referendum that passes, and I'm very optimistic that this will, but I don't mind leaving money on the table. And I've said that before, because I do believe we need this to pass. And so the community told us this is where we're comfortable supporting it. And the facility study to me was shocking. So from an individual board member, that's where I stood.
I'd like to add one.
Go ahead, Dr. Furr.
As a teacher, I work at the university, and sometimes maybe every few years, maybe get a 2% raise. And yet we see capital improvement projects. Okay, and so I understand what it feels like to not get a raise and not have a wage that matches my credentials or my years of experience. I know what that feels like, because that's my life. And I know what it feels like for that to be my salary, and to see a fountain go up, and then another building go up, and then landscaping, and then something else about sports that doesn't matter to me. And so I really understand in my bones what that feels like. And I do not, I don't feel really good about approving something that does that thing that I experience every year at my job. And say, for that fountain, you could have hired an assistant professor. For that thing, you could have hired, or you could have increased the wages of the people you say you value, who are the whole reason this place happens. I get that. And I am trying to reconcile that lived experience with what we're looking at here.
I guess I'll say that I resonate most with you, Commissioner Zur. It's not big enough. It's not enough. I'll out myself as being more optimistic. I think one of the reasons maybe that this is as low as it is because our community hasn't been asked. Right? So, Dr. Johnson, maybe sometimes you are less optimistic than I, right? And you suggested maybe it's because our community only supports education up to a certain extent. We've had 2 referendums in the last 10 years, right? 2011, 12, something like that, in 2016. Right? We haven't made a habit. We haven't had a plan. And I said last meeting, I believe in this community. I think we should do more. I think we should ask for more. I think we should be asking for operational. And I agree with you that I think it's a disappointment to not have that plan, the articulated and specific plan ready to go. This has been a discussion. But I also agree that we have capital needs, we have that. And so as we look, I do agree with you too, Dr. Beekett, that I think this board and I think this community and this administrative team in this district are ready to move forward on that process. I will be, I think it's, for the policy section, it's probably just a short description, but it will require us to do that. I think that this process has put to me the idea that we need to not have a referendum committee and that the full board needs to do the referendum work as part of our ongoing job. Because the committee has the ability to talk. This was a switch from the direction the board gave at the last meeting. And this is an example when you look at the coherent governance materials of why committees are a little harder to work with because certain members get more information, have time to think about it. I think you've done a tremendous job and I appreciate the work that you've done, and Abby, the work that you've done in outlining why this is a way that we can go, the simplicity of it, especially of just a question with one number rather than that does speak to me in terms of, making it easier for voters. But I think we all need to be involved in this, as I've heard Commissioner Clements, Dr. Farrar, Commissioner Zur talk about, your input and insight are useful and critical as well. And I think we might be shortchanging ourselves if we keep that to 3 members, regardless of their level of optimism about the process. Like Commissioner Zur, I'm not going to vote no to any question because we have capital needs, we have operational needs. If this is the way that we think that we should go for the simplicity, that's fine. As much as I can as a single board member, I want to demand that we're back in 2 years and not in 3, and that plan is complete and specific. And frankly, to say you can say we're going to use this for this topic, and that will morph in the 20 years of a plan, and we won't be using it necessarily for the exact same thing. Within, if we're generalized, we have to be specific of what we're going to start with, but general enough that as needs change or as data comes in to say this particular action might be more effective, we can still use that money. We need to have that has to be, a focus, and it's going to, whether it's the referendum committee, which, we'll have to consider on, but I think we should be considering how do we allow the full board to participate in that. But of course, as does almost all of our board work, it's going to fall to the administrative team to do most of the legwork, to do most of the planning, to give all of those options. So, I'm thankful for all of the options that came forward. Seeing all of the questions across all of the different types was very helpful going into it. But it has to be back in 2 years, and then it has to be back, I'm going to say 4 years from it. We already know, talking with Baird, that we're going to do better in a larger turnout election, and we should be planning for that too. We should be planning for fall elections when there's going to be a large turnout, because that's what's best for our district. Because when our district shows up to vote, they vote alongside our schools. I think Commissioner Zur, recently you said to me something along the lines of, if we want excellent public schools in Eau Claire, we have to pay for them. We do. This isn't enough. This is, I think, what we're going to have to do right now because of the time frame, because of some of the things that I think disruption of the last few years has brought us to this point. But we're going to have to come back soon, and I believe that our community is going to be on board with us, and we need to be messaging that right now. That this is the first step in the vision that's going to get us to a place where Eau Claire has both the excellent schools that we believe in and the funding to make us even better. I wish that we had operations here, and I think all of us probably do, even if the pragmatism or the state that we're in lead us to where we are. Commissioner Zur, and then looks like Dr. Johnson.
Josh was
Commissioner Clements, sorry.
So I'm still not there, honestly, about not having operations, because I was a state employee. I've been a state or city employee my entire career, except for a while I was in college. I was a state employee when our previous governor was elected. I was a UW employee when Act 10 was adopted, and I worked for 2 cities since then. We were sold a bill of goods at the state that they manufactured a deficit which didn't exist. But they tried to do a bait and switch on public employees across the board, and they won, and they've succeeded. And that's one reason why we're here. And we've had, by almost any reasonable accounts, the longest and greatest economic expansion this country has ever seen in the last 12 years. And this is where we are. And every year we've been told, oh, we're not there. There are people who are hurting. We can't give the public employees more. And I get it. There is a lot of disparities that are out there. There's a lot of need, most of it manufactured because of poor economic policy, but it's out there. But we've continued to just tell ourselves that we support public education, not this year. And here we are. Like, it's going to get worse in the next year or two. So no matter what happens in the world, we could always be telling ourselves there are people out there who are suffering. We need to not do this. And in all honesty, the people who pay for the increases in taxes are the people who have it, by and large. So does someone who's on a fixed income pay when income tax or when property taxes go up? Yes, they do, for sure. But that's not where most of it hits. So, we're in this situation because we've been telling ourselves that we support education, but we haven't been. We've been telling ourselves this, but we haven't been putting our money where our mouths are, essentially. And if you picked up someone off the street and asked them if they believe this, they'd say, no way, because my tax bill goes up every year. But in all reality, we're spending less and less per pupil in real terms over the same period of time, despite the fact if you flip this angle up, the other way, that's where income has been going. And so it's not sustainable. And so while I think that we absolutely do have, I'm the first person to say we need to be strategic. We need to have that 30-year plan. We need to chart out where we're going, but we need to stop the bleeding too. And, we have my reference earlier about $2.5 or $3 million, whatever it was that we didn't have to make different decisions on insurance. That was just an order of magnitude. There's other needs out there, and we shouldn't say that, we need to continue this because we don't want to pay our employees market rate. We absolutely should. We should say what we're going to be using the money for. But, you know, we don't have enough base funding to even do the things that we currently do, much less try to make up for lost ground. So I would really like to see what a 30-year referendum strategy looks like, and maybe I would need to be convinced, but maybe waiting until November 2024 makes more sense. But again, we're not going to get any closer to where we need to be by not doing it sooner. So I'm just not there, because I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better, and we can only use ESSER for certain things. And some of those things are not what we absolutely are needing.
Commissioner Zerb, and then Dr. Johnson.
Okay, go back a slide, Abby, to the mill rates one. Okay. If you zoom in, we're not the little blurb surrounded by green. We're down. We're surrounded by blue. That's us. And I just want to say that there are districts sitting right there that are within 15, 10, 5-minute drive of Eau Claire. It's the beautiful part about living here is that there's all these wonderful cities just very close by. And I just want us to be very clear when we're saying no to operations right now. When we go and talk about the CPI, which is going to be substantial next year, it's going to be hefty. It's going to be perhaps double what we looked at this spring. And there's no way, and we all know that. We all know that there's no way we're giving the full CPI. That's going to be really tough. That's going to be really tough for us as a district. And when you're looking at a funding disparity from what is that? The bottom to all, over half. What are those other districts going to be able to do? And that concerns me, because those districts and we might keep our staff living in our community, but they might choose to commute to another school district because they're able to fund. And I am concerned about that from an operational standpoint. I worry that will be the thing with a capital only referendum that I worry a lot about, is what happens when we're talking CPI next spring. And we're looking at 9, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9%. I mean, that's just something that I think we need to be very cognizant of as we make the capital only decision. I still think again, like, I'm not going to vote no, but I just want us to remember that.
Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, it's the insights are real. I wanted to comment though. I think I perceive it as a slight on capital, and I may have actually only been only person that has lived in homes infested by various bugs. Probably lived experience without lights, running water at times, and as a kid going to public schools, you look forward to the opportunity to actually go into a place exceptionally different than actually where you lived. I'm not amused when my daughter comes back that water's running down a wall in a 6th grade class. Capitals matter. What we have to realize, the percentage of actually individuals in that low SES, and I differ from Commissioner Clemens in this thought that actually individuals don't feel it. In our community, they do, and so when I think about capital, I also think what's bold. I am not. I probably share some of Dr. Farrar's comments about athletics, but What I actually think it's bold to actually have like a turf field and potentially reach out to some donors or public-private partnerships to get some lights and stands and have like a true actual quote unquote north-south at your home high school, and having the opportunity to go to both North and high school graduations and see lovely bands. How great would it be to actually a fall concert and a spring concert on a turf field at a high school? Pretty cool. But when we think about the capital, you know, this whole idea, it matters for some of our kids. I would say probably for a lot of the kids to be able to in these hot summer months to go into a building with adequate air conditioning and have that for 8 hours, knowing that you're going home is something less. Those are real experiences. I lived them. And so for me, I don't downplay the significance of actually the capital. I think it also, given the fact that we're in a community that there's a lot of people, multi-generations that have come from this particular community, they would be probably very insightful going into a school if it looks different than actually when they attend. That kind of moves the needle in the top. I don't discredit the need for operation. And, you know, for me, I'm all for going to an operational referendum in 2 years. Where I would disagree, though, this idea of how you provide general terminology with specifics, I struggle kind of with that with that concept. I would like to know where my money is actually going. Because you're asking me overall to actually trust the district and the decision makers to make that decision. That level of optimism doesn't exist in our current society. And I'm not sure that actually that level of trust will be here in 2 years. And when we talk about in the state of Wisconsin, the political climate is the way it is because they support actually the maintaining of actually lower taxes. If you maintain lower taxes, something has to sacrifice. And the data is clear. What sacrifices, one of the things is spending on actually services and in schools. Now it's up to the local community. And I think one of those referendums earlier, one of them didn't pass. Is that correct? Or did both of them?
Ours.
Yeah, was it the 2012 or the
0708.
0708? So and interesting, if you go back to that chart, the 0708, we were still way above kind of where we were now. Obviously, our community couldn't stomach that. I think a strategic plan, however, 2 to 3 years, definitely operational. I still think there has to be specifics to where the money's going. And I'm not sure, I would not support a selling piece of actually going towards salaries. If we know that economic climate hadn't changed for community members where they're not getting raises. As a state employee, I've been a state employee for 16 years. I don't anticipate a raise, ever. So it's a difficult ask for me. For me, when I think about operational, it's more teachers, it's more support staff. It's the idea of can we do more in terms of enriching learning experience, more off campus like field trips or something like that. For me, I can do all of that. You know, the other stuff. If we're going to go that route, we have to do a better job of articulating this is the reality of where we are. This is the business of actually educating your students. And as an educator, that's a difficult piece that I have always, I can't align myself, a business model to actually the education of children. Because in the reality of the business model, there's difficult decisions that have to be made. This chart's a difficult decision. And the last thing I would say is, you know, as much as there's more optimistic individuals on this in this group, every person, when I look at this chart, the other thing that came to me, every other person that was in this seat before us actually also made a decision actually not to be bold. also made a decision to be calculated in actually what they asked. If they didn't, we would have actually seen a lot more change. So that goes to tell you how difficult this decision of actually how you secure funding actually for our local schools are. And that's when I look at this chart, that was really one of the telling. There's a lot of individuals who have been in this seat have decided actually not to go in certain directions. Why? They've been at the same point where we are in terms of our decision making. So once again, I support the capital. I support 2 years operational and addressing the more of the capital at the same time, and are just operational, and then 3 years doing capital. And like for me, I'm all in favor of that. But I also think right now, for me, the capital and where we're at, that's where I would support. Oh, and then I also support that if we're getting rid of the referendum committee, the referendum committee is just a full board. It makes sense as well.
So your comments about specific versus general, I'm going to use that as a segue to maybe move us a little bit forward in our conversation here. We have 2 questions that the committee brought forward. I feel like one of them is a little more general. That would be question A in my mind with the at district schools, and one of them is more specific, question B. And Dr. Johnson, I'm going to put you, which one do you prefer here? As I think we've had a chance to talk about how we feel about this particular issue. We've got this question in front of us. Where would you like us to start, Dr. Johnson, with which one should we consider first?
Yeah, so for me, and Abby can just articulate, I would be fine with actually question A. However, in the communication, and you can't actually use like promotion given to
Informational.
for informational purposes. Yeah, thank you. That on the website that they go to, that we have all the list of schools.
Sure.
And the check marks of the things that will be done based on the referendum. If that's in place, I'm fine with option A, but it all has to roll out like together for me. And if it can't, then I guess you go with question. I am fine with question A as long as the informational material has everything listed in terms of the schools. Or you just do if we can't have that like happening at the same time. I would have to revert to B, but I'm fine with question A, because the other thing that makes sense is if, I don't know how things would come in under bid, that's less optimistic, but if there is room that you have a little bit more flexibility with this the identification of district schools. So I'm fine with question A.
Other thoughts or comments on between the 2 questions?
A question for Abby, to Commissioner Johnson's point, can we use it? I agree with them. Is that possible? Can we use question A and build in that listing of schools? Because I think that does inform the public in a better way.
Yes.
Sorry, this is your question. Go ahead, sorry.
Sure. Okay. That was one of the things that we had talked a lot about at the referendum committee. So I pulled out some of the communication and some of the tools that we had on our website from 2016. And so the chart that you're talking about is we had a list of, here's the things that we're going to accomplish and by building, and we were able to just articulate and check which buildings we're going to get what. And so I would envision the same thing for this time around. I think right now we have some pretty specific goals and projects identified in that 98.6 million. But I think having the flexibility of district, I would propose, and obviously we would be continuing to work on this with our communication plan and our team, but do we have a section that specifically says district schools? And then, those things would be to be determined, because it's going to be dependent upon the timing and what do projects come in as far as cost goes. And we don't know that today, but I think that we can use that as part of our story, right? As we're planning, here's what we've got now, but there's always things that change, because the other thing we need to recognize is this work is not going to be completed next summer. South Middle School is probably a 2 to 3 year project, because we have to work around when students are there. And so what does that look like? And so, this morning I had a meeting with kind of the facility team and the architects and the engineers, and looking at what does this look like? Can we start building a schedule? Because we want to share that with our community as well as to, here's the things that we can knock off in summer of 23. Here's what summer of 24 looks like, summer of 25. When we issue bonds, there is a time limit to get the construction done. And so being very strategic, we have 3 years once those bonds are issued to get the construction completed. So that's kind of the next step on that team, is developing the timeline. So we can also share that with our community. And I was envisioning that as part of that document with the, here's the schools and here's the check marks they're going to get. That timeline would also be articulated to the best of our ability today, right? There's a lot of things that we can't control. We have projects that were supposed to happen this summer that we don't have the materials for. They have said we ordered them in March. Oh, yep, you're going to have them in time in August, and we still don't know where they're at. So some things are beyond our control, but I think our community will understand that because they're experiencing that themselves. It's not just specific to school district by any means. So I think, Commissioner Lyons, to answer your question, yes, because that's what we've been talking about and how we would share that so people can know and see.
Dr.
One
Beekman.
thing about the question B that we talked about in the committee is it provides a safety net in the sense that not every voter who walks into the polls had an opportunity to look at that informational material. So it speaks to everybody that this referendum is going to touch a lot of buildings. So no matter what your level of knowledge when you walk in there to vote, the reach.
Commissioner Zer.
So I just want to tell a funny story. When I first voted, my very first vote ever, as a young person, there was a school this was in South Dakota. There was a school district referendum on the ballot. And the only reason I voted, I knew nothing. I was just blind as a bat walking in there. And the only reason I checked yes on that was because my elementary school was listed in that, you know what I mean? And I was just, that was just a purely emotional moment of well, of course I'm gonna give them money. It was a terrible building. It needed so many updates. And, we have a real limited window to Dr. Farrar's comments here. We're coming out of a pandemic when we basically told everybody to stay away from each other and don't talk to anybody. And now we're going to try to go out and get everyone together again and have big conversations. And we're starting from behind in a lot of ways. And I like the safety net and I understand the flexibility, but I also like that our community is going to see right on the ballot the investment that they are making in their neighborhood. And in, and even if it's not their kids or their grandkids, in those cute little kids down the block or whatever it might be, right? I prefer this question. I know it's long, it's meaty. We might not get through half of it before we check a box, but I'm just saying that I think that those big capital letters will pop out at people. I think they will see their school. So I prefer this one. My second question is, I know that we are touching more co-curricular and career and technical education components of our schools than just athletics. And I understand why the word athletic is in there, because there are specific elements of, athletics are popular and they're highly, sought after facility improvement, for our schools, especially at our high schools. Were there any drafts of this where we outlined some of the other co-curricular? And I also think that right now, and I will just speak from my professional experience, when we're looking at our communities, our business communities, our professional communities, we have a severe workforce shortage. And for the first time, businesses are looking at schools like, how are you getting kids ready to come and work here? Because I need help, and they're drowning, and they want us to be a part of those conversations. And if we are improving tech ed facilities, technology, the digital arts, drafting, whatever we should be listing that in here. someplace. And so I don't know if there was any other draft of that language right in the middle, infrastructure, site and athletic facility improvements that included perhaps some more robust language around the specific co-curricular.
No, we didn't. We really sent it over to the bond attorney with the list of here's the projects. And going back to the career and tech ed, those were not items that we were able to squeeze into when we were looking at the 72, the 92 and the 110. Those were that piece was not, we weren't able to fit that into that box. So I think at the two high schools, in the proposed plan, the biggest items at Memorial would be the auditorium. That was over 7 million of the 19 million. And at North, the classroom addition was probably one of the largest numbers. And then probably 6.5 million for that, for the addition of the classrooms. And then the athletic entrance and weight room, 5.5-ish. 5.5-ish.
For $1.5 million for the expansion of the commons and.
Dr. Beacon.
We talked a lot about wording at the last committee meeting. And I'll say what, one of the issues that came up was just the length of the question. And kind of, you lose your reader at some point. So what would they even get to? Your question about sort of adding more like about being tech ed or anything like within those needs. I had a question. I actually thought, and I may have missed something. I thought we were entertaining eliminating athletic and just leaving it as site and facility, because that opens it up to everything. And it doesn't sort of give people the false impression that it's really just about athletics, because it's about a lot of things. And we learned from both, Mark and Johnson and Baird talked about athletics can be divisive. It can be problematic if people think the focus is just athletics. It doesn't address, so what I'm saying, we didn't have a strategy to address bringing all that richness into what's already a very long question. But I did think we landed with omitting athletic.
So we did go back and forth with that, and that was a question that I asked the bond attorney as well. And because when they looked at the total projects, I sent them like, here's what we're doing, all of those, because a large piece of that was related to not just athletics, but co-curricular as well. Because if you think about the auditorium, they felt that the amount was large enough in total that it should be labeled athletic. Now, could it be changed to co-curricular?
Yeah,
potentially, probably.
Talked about the word extracurricular.
Or extracurricular. Mm-hmm.
I like that, changing that word.
I do too.
I agree. Removing and or replacing.
That would be something that we would be able to do with an amendment during some sort of a motion process. I like question A better personally, because what the person that comes in and doesn't see DeLong and doesn't see Roosevelt on there, it doesn't give them that rush of emotion. Whereas when you see district schools, like, that even if you've looked at the list and it's not that school, it could be, because we don't know what the prices are going to be, right? If we were doing this, you're right. I think it's unlikely that it comes in like way under budget, but we've had projects in the past come in under budget. And if we were doing this 6 months ago, cost for lumber was double what it is right now. It's still very high, right? And so some things in gas is lower than it used to be. Like some things can change. And I think it gives us that flexibility. And we've done that, even we did that for operations in the last one. We had those larger kind of buckets, right? And that's I guess kind of what I'm getting at when I say specifics with flexibility is not, we didn't say we're going to reduce class size by exactly 1.5 kids on average, because we don't know how it's going to work or where we might need more. It's class size for teacher retention, And we can have that discussion as we go into operations for the specifics, but I think we've done that strategy of being a little more general to give us flexibility when we recognize that we have, excesses, hopefully something does come in and we can tack on another project. We can do another 1/10 of a roof. We can, we can spend that money somewhere else if we save, district schools. So I guess I favor question A personally. And in either one, I think it's a good idea to put co-curricular as opposed to athletic, or just remove. I think co-curricular is probably better if they're saying we need to highlight that it's not just going right into only academic spaces. It seems like a point where it might be appropriate for someone to motion. I believe the motion needed for this one is to approve the initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed $98,600,000. And then it would need to specify, I know Abby has it up there as option A or option B. Here on the actual thing, that's option 1 or option 2. But so anyone care to put one of them forward for discussion?
I move to initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in the amount not to exceed $98.6 million.
And for which of the 2 options?
I think because I heard more for, I would say, option 2.
B2. So what we've seen is B, but yes, 2 on the thing. Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion on the motion.
I would like to make a motion to amend.
Okay.
I would like to amend striking the word athletic so that it reads site and facility improvements.
Oh, no, because it has to have a
Co-curricular.
it has to be co-curricular, extracurricular, because it has to, according to the learning piece, it has to have that piece. And then so it just can't be the site and facility. It has to be so site and or co-curricular or extracurricular. So
Okay,
Extracurricular is fine.
I can go with extracurricular in place of athletic. I also believe that bond attorneys by them very nature are conservative. And I think that we would be allowed to.
Okay, before we get to discussion.
Okay,
There's a motion to amend the motion to strike the word athletic and replace it with extracurricular, I believe. Is there a second for the amendment?
second.
Now, is there discussion on the amendment? Commissioner Lyons? You were saying.
I like this change. Editorializing, to do that later.
Sure. Any other discussion on the proposed amendment?
For me.
I like it.
Hearing none, there no significant commentary. Thank you for the 2 of you. I will call the question just for clarity throughout this process. Terry, I'm going to have you just do roll call votes so we don't have to, because if one or the other of the things is close, I don't want to have to go back through.
Commissioner Zur,
Again, this is on the amendment alone to replace athletic with extracurricular.
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons,
Yes.
Commissioner Nordin,
Yes. The amendment passes. We'll now return to the motion to approve question B with the change from athletic to extracurricular facility improvements. Further discussion on the motion? I'm going to say I'm struggling because I do really think A is the better way to go, that it gives us more flexibility, and I'm having a tough decision internally right now as to whether I want to vote no on this question just to get a chance to go for A. I think this is fine, but I just like the added flexibility and the added ability to move funds that might come in, you know, to somewhere else where they're needed. So that's all I have to say about it. I guess I will find out what I vote when we get to the end. Go ahead, Commissioners. There.
To that point, if there are things that we're leaving on the table at these schools, then I don't see any problem with it.
Great question. Abby, is this, it said, you know, kind of medium and high for all of the elementary schools. Are there ways that we can, I still like the flexibility better, but if we have, you know, if South comes in $1 million under that 48 million or whatever, that it's 42. So if it comes in at 42 flat somehow, do we have $700,000 that can be spent on the schools that are listed in that question?
Yeah, it can
Yeah,
go
we get some
out of
anywhere.
exceptions,
Sure.
but
Gotcha.
there's flexibility in the schools that are named.
Still like
All of our schools. I mean,
we have 20
a lot of them,
new buildings.
a lot of them.
It is a lot. I still like the flexibility that's there. Dr. Bika.
If this one would help ease your mind, in question A, something that can be talked about with the board is that using district schools actually means the funding cannot be applied to 500 Main or the service center. So we kind of crossed that bridge where we said, you know, we accept that. There aren't enough needs just in the schools.
Sure.
And I think the same thing goes to B2. It's not difficult to make gains in those schools. So if that helps at all.
It's the flexibility that appeals to me. I want to give, you know, Mark has said several times, we want to give as many reasons to say yes to this as possible. And I think that question B limits it. I think it cuts out some people that are not going to, they're going to say, well, why isn't our local elementary school in here? Why isn't Lakeshore in here? Why isn't, you know, and I realize the reasons why that is, but that doesn't matter. What I know about it doesn't matter when, you know, someone else walks into the building. Commissioner Lance.
I will tell you why I prefer question B. I think your average voter scans this. I don't think they read it. And for the point made very clearly by by Commissioner Burr.
Up and coming.
Maybe someday. I think if people are reading this and they see one of their schools, it will make a difference in how they vote. And it is very much along the lines of giving people a reason to vote. It's just kind of a different lens.
So I think we heard it at the survey results presentation that less specific things are favored by voters. But I really think this is an impressive list of schools. Like, it's a lot of schools. And so I guess for me, I'm holding both of those ideas in my mind, that there's a data point and then there's like a really impressive list of a lot of our neighborhood schools that are going to have significant improvements made to them that spreads out across a lot of Eau Claire. That's a lot of neighborhoods. That inclines me to be. Because the public has also asked us to tell them exactly what we plan to do. And I think this is a way of being really specific about what we plan to do. And that we are going to make meaningful change that makes things better.
No other discussion. I guess unless there's objection, I will call the question.
We had a second.
We can select, I mean, technically, yeah, it takes 2/3 vote to call the question, but unless we, again, without objection, I will take it on unanimous consent. So the motion to approve initial resolution authorizing general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed 98,600,000, option 2 as amended. Terry, if you would do a roll call.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine.
Yes. That brings us then to the second part, which is the resolution to approve, provide for a referendum election on the question of the approval of the initial resolution authorizing the issuance of general obligation bonds in an amount not to exceed 98,600,000. This puts our question onto the ballot. And so since this, I think, is sort of pro forma in that we just approved the question itself, I would just ask for a motion to adopt the resolution.
Motion to adopt the resolution.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, Terry, if you would once again conduct a roll call.
Commissioner Zur,
Yes.
Commissioner Bika,
Yes.
Commissioner Clements,
Yes.
Commissioner Farrar,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnson,
Yes.
Commissioner Lyons.
Yes.
Commissioner Nordine.
Yes. So now we've got the work of getting the information out there. And for board members being able to help support that. So expect invitations to various events. And let's get out there and do it. At this time, we'll move on to our regular board debrief. Commissioner Zur, you were the third member of the most recent agenda setting, and so I will turn it to you to run through tonight's debrief.
Sure. Do I need to introduce this at all anymore? Commissioner Clements.
I thought that, especially coming to the point of determining the question, we learned that we really needed to work on this throughout the year. And so I really appreciate the suggestions for how to do that. In terms of having it be part of our regular schedule and to have a long-term plan and to monitor it. I had the opportunity to briefly join the referendum committee and I learned a lot, but I felt like I was taking a little sip. And then I was like, I got a little taste and now I know what I'm missing. And when you come to this meeting, you recognize that there was a lot of discussion that had already been happening. And while it certainly would threaten how well we do in terms of keeping our meetings to an affordable time, I think that that's something we really need to do and I think one thing perhaps is the reason why we have found ourselves in a current budget situation like this is because it hasn't perhaps been part of the regular board discussion as to how do we address revenue, because the school board's been maxing out every year as far as I know. And so they just haven't gone out to make that ask. And so hopefully if we have that conversation regularly, we're more aware and our community is more comfortable with us doing that, what the need is. So I thought the discussion, we just scratched the surface of some of the things we could have talked about tonight. So I look forward to hopefully figuring out how we can have this conversation into the ongoing part of our business.
I don't know how much this is a debriefing, but I'm interested in how people felt about this is not like a question I'm asking, more just thinking about it and giving feedback at some point, but how did it feel to have a couple of the coherent governance, the policies appear as part of the consent agenda? So I mean, this is like kind of some new areas for us, you know, as we come into this next year. We talked a little bit about this in agenda setting. There won't be many, you know, that this happens where they come on to consent. Just, you know, how was that experience? And then the other thing was we had the employee handbook, which is one of those areas that, and there weren't really major changes because those will come later, but again, it's more of a question of just how people felt about having the handbook and talking through it and, you know, what's kind of our purview and what's not. So it's just more procedural things.
I really appreciated the discussion we had about the referendum. I think that all the board members shared important insights into their process and what they were struggling with in order to make this decision and to bring this particular question forward. So I'm grateful for the thoughtfulness and the goodwill of my colleagues. And I want to second that. I agree that the full board should be doing the work of the referendum committee going forward.
I also appreciate it. I think one of the things that we've managed to do by instituting this new governance system where we are focused on very specific things is that it allows us to command and control our time in a way that allows us to have time like this to do that work. You know, I haven't, you know, served on the board out, you know, all that long, but my impression is if we wanted to have this hour-and-a-half conversation prior to this, you know, this year or the last year or two, it would have added another hour-and-a-half onto a already 7 to 9 meeting. And we're finding ways to carve those things out. So as we look at and consider, I think referendum committee needs to continue until we're ready to do it, but I think we can find time within our monitoring to bring those things forward while not dropping the ball on things like the communication plan, because that's part of what we're all talking about here too, is how do we communicate our referendum needs? How do we use that plan to be interacting as we go? And so I appreciate that work that we're all able to do. I think that's an overall thing that our board is succeeding at this particular point, and it's incumbent on us to keep doing better. I appreciate all of your insight tonight, especially just at the very end for me to settle in and say that, you know, get behind that, you know, not that it was going to make a difference on the make or break, but to know and to hear those ideas and the ability to have us just share our thoughts up and down is something that I haven't always experienced on the board just because of that time crunch. So I'm glad for that. I think the thing that we have to work on and the thing that is incumbent on this board for right now and every board in the future is to commit to getting that plan and that vision for funding, dealing with revenue, as you said, Commissioner Clements. And that is something that we have not done before. And our predecessors, at least as near as we can tell, haven't developed that structure. And I think we have to fully go forward with that. And so I think that's the challenge to us tonight is how can we make sure that we're not talking about why didn't we have operations tonight? Because I do remain disappointed in that one aspect of it. But we need to come back in 2 years and we need to be aggressive and we need to ask and we need to be specific in our vision as we come. And that does rely on the board to push that forward as much as it does the administration to do the legwork to get us there, and for you, Superintendent Johnson, to dream big and imagine, you know, if it's $2 million a year, if it's $4 million a year, if it's 5 million, if it's 12, 20, if it's whatever millions we get by knocking the mill rate up $3, so we're at least competitive, whatever it is, we need you to be ready to go with that vision as well. So I think that's our challenge as a board, though, is to keep pushing that work forward, even as we deal with all of the other things and bringing our student results forward. So it's not going to be an easy task. Sorry, I kind of went on it. Thank you.
One of the things that was brought up in public comment that I'd like to agree with and call out is the increments. As I understand it, the coaching, the extracurricular, the music is paid in a stipend. And when when the general salary increases are distributed by this board, they don't touch those increments. And I think that it's something that the board should take a look at. I think we need to bring that back and take a look at that because I've had some questions and some issues, and it sounds like that's been an issue before. So I'd like to open that up and take a look at that. The referendum committee not being a committee, that's fine. But where I'm not sure I'm with you, Chairman, is the time. I know that we can't get a good in-depth conversation around referendum and budget within the 7 to 9 weekly meeting. Maybe we can't, but you know, we changed the name from budget development to referendum. It's the same thing. A referendum plan is a long-range financial outlook that takes in not only the revenue, but projections on expense. And then we take a look at those revenue and those expense projections, and we get an understanding of where the district is and how a referendum might fill those gaps. And I think that that's the kind of really in-depth sessions that maybe we need to do in work sessions. I don't think, and I'm fine with the full board kind of doing those things, because every year when we take a look at the benefits or the salary or even just capital maintenance, you know, it's, well, can we afford this? Well, let's look at that plan and how we're moving the parts around. So I agree that we need a plan and that we need to continue a referendum, but I also think we need to have more conversations just around the finances within the district. So.
You know, this is difficult work, difficult decisions that have to be made. Ultimately, the reality of these decisions temper actually the utopian idea that you have about the educational experience for young people. Yeah, it's very, very, very difficult. Positive to be able to get myself off of another committee is always favorable for me professionally. So I think that's good, but this is difficult. You know, I think we all want the best for kids. We all want the best learning experiences for our teachers, but it's tempered by the reality of, like I said, the matters of the day. And the matters of the day is actually we have to fund everything that we want to do, and that's a challenge. Thank you.
Thanks. I think, you know, it's been an interesting few weeks thinking about this for me, because I feel like it finally clicked when I was talking to Superintendent Johnson, and actually the operationalizing, are you putting, you know, the referendum plan in OE10 came up as, you know, from him. And I think that that for me, when I think about, you know, when you look at other school districts and how this is done, and, you know, strategic planning and this big, you know, you bring in the community and you go through this big strategic planning process, and it, you know, sets the direction of the ship for the next however many X number of years. And the board's job is to, you know, maintain that vision. And we are leaning into results policies to be our strategic plan. Those are supposed to be our strategic plan. So they need to be as rich and as forward thinking as what we would get from that big community brainstorming, planning, what matters to you, what are we going to fund, what are we going to pay attention to for the next X number of years, right? And I mean, and we're eating them in little, you know, smaller chunks of a year, and, you know, with the results policies. And so I feel like it came very clear to me that with coherent governance. Like this is something that I actually am like, I get it. It's clicking for me. We're like, oh, we have these things that we're aiming for. We have results for kids. We're looking at, here's what we do really well and here's where we want to be, right? And we're always going to be looking where we want to be. And now we can say, what are the resources that we need to get there? And when in the plan are we doing that? You know, when is that coming? And that is a very holistic approach that I think for me gives me a lot of ability to hopefully articulate that for our community. And, you know, I think that this work continued on into the future gives us an opportunity to talk about funding directly as it relates to student results, both from an operation perspective and from what Dr. Johnson referenced related to capital improvements. So I don't know, I've been really appreciative of the conversation and kind of wish I would have been on the referendum committee. I'm not gonna lie. Nice work, guys. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioners. There. At this time, I would hear a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.